So, welcome back to Chapter 2 of How the English Bible Came to Be. Just over a year later, King Henry VIII authorized the publication of the Matthew Bible. This, for the most part, was Tyndale's work. From that work came the Geneva Bible, the Great Bible, and later the King James Version, which relied heavily on Tyndale's translations. We've already talked about how important Tyndale was to everything. He was fundamental to all of the English Bibles that came after that. After Henry died, his daughter Mary became queen and returned the country to Catholicism and burned John Rogers at the stake. So if you think the Protestant Reformation wasn't difficult, think again. Queen Mary was often referred to as Bloody Mary. As a matter of fact, I think there's a drink named that, and that's where it came from. She was relentless, especially in terms of returning the monarchy to Catholicism. When it went Protestant, it really upset a lot of people, to say the least. So Queen Elizabeth I succeeded Mary and abolished the rule of Catholicism and returned England to the Anglican Church and allowed the Calvinists to have freedom as well. During Queen Mary's reign, the Calvinists were really locked down. They just couldn't do much of anything during this period of time. She was succeeded by King James VI of Scotland, who changed his name to James I and ended the rule of the Tudors and began the Stuart reign over England. There's been a popular TV show going on, The Tudors, and so on HBO or something or another like this. And Elizabeth I was the last of the Tudors, and the Stuarts began with James I, who is originally from Scotland. There were several Bibles circulating during the period, including the Geneva Bible and the Bishop's Bible. This caused a lot of discontent between the Anglicans and the Calvinists, as the Geneva Bible relies heavily on the pomp and circumstance or pomp and ceremonialism of the Anglican Church. A biblical scholar himself, and having had translated a few of the Psalms, James, the King James, sought to bring the feuding factions together around a single new translation. John Reynolds, a Puritan, tried in a conference to scholars to get James to turn his face against the Bishop's Bible. The plan backfired when James said the translation would be based on the Bishop's Bible, and condemned the notes in the Geneva Bible as partial, untrue, and seditious. If you'll remember from the earlier chapter, we talked about there were marginal notes in the Geneva Bible that were very anti-royal. Let's just put it that way. He then put Reynolds in charge of translating the prophets. It took 7 years to complete their work, and Reynolds died just before its completion. The length of time was due to the translators sending their work to colleagues for confirmation. This has been referred to as the forerunner of the peer review system that is in wide use today. All scientists and scholars of all kinds submit their work for peer review so that others can check out their conclusions and such, and either agree or disagree and do more research or whatever. So there were 15 rules for accomplishing the translation. And this is kind of important because this kind of gives you the reason for why a number of things were done in the King James Version. Number one, the ordinary Bible read in church, commonly called the Bishop's Bible, to be followed and as little altered as the truth of the original will permit. Number two, the names of the prophets and the holy writers and the other names of the text to be retained as nigh as may be, according as they were vulgarly used. And vulgarly just means common, not vulgar the way we think of it today. Number 3, the old ecclesiastical words to be kept. That, for example, the word church not to be translated congregation, and so on. When a word had diverse significance, now that's actually diverse. They just didn't put the E on it, but when a word had diverse significance, that it to be kept when it's most commonly used by most of the ancient fathers, being agreeable to the propriety of the place and the analogy of the faith. Basically, don't go against tradition. This was very, very important. Number 4, when a word has, number 5 now, sorry, the division of the chapters to be altered either not at all or as little as may be, if necessity so require. It had already been divided up into chapters. He did not want those chapter divisions to be changed any at all. No marginal notes at all to be affixed, but only for the explanation of the Hebrew or Greek words, which cannot without some circumlocution be so briefly and fitly be expressed in the text. No commentaries, in essence, because that's what the big problem with the Geneva Bible was. It had so much commentary written in the marginal notes, and so he didn't like that. Number 7, such quotations of places to be marginally set down as shall serve for the fit reference of one scripture to another. Number 8, every particular man of each company, to take the same chapter or chapters, and having translated or amended them severally by himself, when he thinketh good, all to meet together, confer what they have done, and agree for their parts and what shall stand. This was a face-to-face kind of peer review that was just hadn't ever been done before in that way. Number 9, as any one company has dispatched any one book in this manner, they shall send it to the rest to be considered of seriously and judiciously, for his majesty is very careful to this point. After they finish the book, they have to send it around to every one of the groups. And it says his majesty is very careful to this point. Number 10, if any company upon the review of the book so sent, doubt or differ upon any place, to send them word thereof, note the place, and withal send the reasons, to which if they consent not the difference, to be compounded at the general meeting, which is to be of the chief persons of each company at the end of the work. All the bosses get together and look at this and then try to resolve. It's kind of like a conflict resolution issue. Number 11, when any place of special obscurity is doubted of, letters to be directed by authority to be sent to learned men in the land for his judgment in such a place. In other words, they wanted this, if they couldn't agree on something, they needed to find all of the Bible scholars and send this to them and get kind of a consensus of opinions, so to speak. We now call it crowdsourcing. Okay, but this is kind of what they were doing back then. Number 13, the directors in each company to be the deans of Westminster and Chester for that place, and the king's professors in the Hebrew or Greek in either university. Number 14, these translations to be used when they agree better with the text than the Bishop's Bible, Tyndale's, Matthew's, Coverdale's, White Church's, and Geneva. So, if they agreed better, then the biggest thing is they want this to agree as much. He was really trying to get it to be as clear as possible without changing any of the real traditions, which really left them in a hard place. Is why some of the words were never, they did sprinkling. So instead of translating that immersed, they just transliterated the word. In other words, they kept baptizo and just changed it to baptism, and that way they didn't have to run afoul of some of these rules. But number 15, beside the said directions before mentioned, 3 or 4 of the most ancient and grave divines in either of the universities not employed in translating to be assigned by the vice chancellor upon conference with the rest of the heads to be overseers of the translations, as well as Hebrews as Greek, to the better observation of the 4th rule specified above. And to go back to that 4th rule, that was the part when the word has diverse significations, that it be kept, which has the most commonly used by the ancient fathers. And so that's why some of them just didn't get completely translated. 2 things are most interesting about this. First, even though they were told to work from the bishop's Bible, at least 80% of the New Testament was based on Tyndale's translation. Second, this is a derivative and not a new translation, as some people imply these days. King James Version was derivative. It was not newly translated. They didn't go back and just say, okay, we're going to move all of the old translations out of the way and we're going to go back and do a completely new one. They did not. As I've said before, it was derived from the bishop's Bible, and then Matthew's and Tyndale's and all the rest of them were checked out for it. Finally, 400 years later, the King James Version still controls 59% of the market, with the NIV in second place with only 19%. Generally, scholars tend to prefer the New Revised Standard Version. I do that, and I use that, and I prefer the American Standard Version as well. In terms of doing research, but not in terms of readability, because readability in the American Standard is a little tough. It's not like Common English, and but it's a good study Bible. So there you have it. This is the development of the English Bible. As you can see, many people died. There's a lot of blood shed for this. When we talk about persecution, people don't really understand what persecution is until you see some of the ways in which some of these translators were put to death for simply implying that the Latin and the original versions weren't good enough and needed to be in the common language. I hope you have enjoyed this. I certainly invite you to listen to and to watch the other videos that I have done. Please leave comments. Let me know if this is too geeky for you, too technical or whatever. Let me know if there are some other videos you would like for me to make in terms of some teaching moment and such, whatever that might be in the biblical area or religion in general. This, after all, was what I went to school for. And so, I would be happy to make videos on any of those, but let me know what you want to do, and just stay in there. God bless you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.